All right, let's get started. Welcome, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Password Management for Medium to Large Organizations, Guidance for IT Security Policy and Network Infrastructure Design Decisions. It's going to be a good one, you guys, with cybersecurity expert Derek A. Smith. You're also joined by BeyondTrust Product Manager Martin Kennard, who will run us through a BeyondTrust overview and demo towards the end of the webinar, so please stick around for that. My name is Sarah, your webinar host today. Always happy to be here with you guys. I just wanted to remind you to please submit your questions via the chat box in the GoToMeeting console anytime throughout the webinar, and we'll cover your questions at the end during our Q&A time. So just pop them on in anytime you have questions comes into your head, and we will cover them at the end. Also, today's session is being recorded, and all attendees will receive a link to the recording and the slides within 1 business day from now, so be on the lookout for that follow-up. So at this point, let's hand this on over to Derek, who will jump right into his presentation. Hello, Derek. Welcome. Thanks for being here today with BeyondTrust.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. And thank everybody for attending today. Hopefully I'll pass on some good information that you can use for all your decision making. So as promised, I'm going to talk about password management today. And all of you all probably know that passwords are the most common authentication technology that we use today. So password management is going to be a primary concern for managers, for companies, and even for people like me, security professionals. Now, the policies, the standards, the complexity associated with password use, these all need to be managed in a consistent way throughout your enterprise. So today I'm going to give you some tips on how we might be able to do that. So let's get started. So I'm going to focus again on password management, of course, and how a medium to large size firm, or even a small firm, how those organizations' decision managers can make good management decisions around the use of passwords. Okay? But first, let's talk about why we even still use passwords, and I'll talk about that in just a second. Password protection, as you see here, is the front line of defense that we have when it comes to guarding against intruders in our password system. So it says here, virtually all multi-user systems require that a user provide not only a name or identifier, but also usually another factor, which is a password. And that password serves to authenticate that person into our network system or whatever type of system we're using. And in turn, that ID is going to provide security in a variety of different ways. And I'm going to talk about those ways throughout. As I was saying, why do we still use passwords, though? In the passwords has been predicted and talked about and lauded over for many, many years now. We have stuff like biometrics and smart cards and one-time password tokens and a lot of other technology out there that we can use as alternatives to password usage, and they are gaining market share. But there are some reasons why we still opt to use passwords, and I have a few of them here. First of all, passwords are cheap. They're cheaper to deploy than any of the alternatives that I just mentioned and anything else that you can probably think of that's out there right now. However, supporting those passwords for forgotten, locked out passwords and having people call the help desk and maintaining the help desk for this, all that can be costly. So perhaps it's better to use a password management system. Second is that some credentials can only be used on compatible devices and in certain ways in certain circumstances. So if I have a smart card, they have to be plugged into a smart card reader. And those are mainly going to be used on PCs like desktops and laptops and things like that. And it's going to be hard to be used on tablets and smartphones to plug them into a smart card. Another one I have is that one-time password tokens that we sometimes use, RSA tokens, things like that. They only work where there's a network connection, and that's going to make them hard for us to use or unsuitable for us to use when we're trying to sign into devices that are sometimes offline. Okay? Every kind of biometric that we use, if we're going to go with biometrics, they have to have some type of sensor, either a fingerprint reader or a retina scanner or some type of camera or something. A microphone is if it's using voice, and not every device user is going to have access to that type of requisite sensor that we need. And then for every biometric out there, there are some users who just physically can't even use them. If it's an amputee or people whose fingers are too small, or if you have retinal damage or something like that, we can't even use that. And then some legacy systems can't even use passwords out there. So there are a lot of different reasons why we can't use it. Now, another thing, though, is that even with passwords, many solutions that's out there for replacement of passwords, well, I wouldn't say replacement password, but use password, they usually like to combine some other type of credential with that password anyway. So we still want to do that in order to create a stronger authentication. So these are some of the reasons why we still keep those old dreaded passwords that people like to write down on pieces of paper and on the back of their keyboard around. So if you're going to keep them around, let me tell you how we can make it more secure in your organization. First, I want to talk about user authentication and passwords and how we can deploy those passwords for that. And before I do that, there's a couple of definitions I want to give you real quick to keep in mind while I'm talking about this. First of all, we talk about identification. And that unique identifier that we use as a user, when we type this into our system or sign into a system application, that's our user login ID or whatever we're using on the system. So first we have identification, that thing that we type in. We have authentication, and authentication is that process where we prove our identity to our actual system. And we usually do that when we're logging in. So we have identification, we have authentication. We have some type of authentication factor that we talk about. And that authentication factor is something that we present to that system in order to prove our identity. So that might be something that I know, that might be something that I have, that might even be something that I am if I'm talking about biometrics. Multi-factor authentication is authentication using multiple factors. For example, a user might sign into the system with a combination of two things, something he knows and something that he has, like a smart card or something like that. And the last thing is strong authentication. And strong authentication refers to an authentication process that's difficult to simulate. It might be based on the use of multiple authentication factors or use a single but hard to prove authentication factor. So those are the things you keep in mind as I go through this presentation. And with this slide, we see here that there are three types of credentials, and it takes some of those things I'll talk about into consideration. So first, you see there we have something that you know, and you see it's described as secret information known only to the user, like your password or your PIN number. Now, the next one is tokens, and tokens are something you have. I mentioned an RSA token a few seconds ago, and that's a physical device possessed only by that user, like a one-time password token, like the RSA token, a smart card, an app on your smartphone, or something like that. And the third one is biometrics, something that you are, and that's a unique measurable characteristic of that user, of yourself, like your voice print for voice verification, your fingerprint, your vascular or vein patterns, your retina or your iris scan. Those are the type of things that you have. So these are the three type of credentials that we have to work with. Now, generally, when we're doing this, it's more secure, but it's less convenient for us to combine multiple credentials. So I may want to have something that I know along with something that I have. So we put these things together, and the strength that we have from using this multi-factor is going to make it stronger for us, make security stronger for us in the first place. Now, due to cost and compatibility with legacy systems, and a legacy system is an old system, or maybe a standalone frame system or something like that. The most popular type of credential still remains to be the password. So we're going to talk more about that. Let's talk about how passwords are compromised in the first place. And there are some security threats around passwords that we want to be familiar with. Now, passwords, as you all know, are simply secret words or phrases that we use. So these are some of the ways that we can compromise that. First of all, user devices may be compromised with a keylogger or some type of similar malware, and it's going to disclose that user input to that attacker. Now, keylogger is simply a software or a hardware device that a software application or a hardware device that we can install on the computer to capture your keystrokes. So when you type in your passwords, let's say, it'll capture your passwords, and then the bad guy will be able to see those passwords as you type them. Or you can go back and get your password and go into your bank account. Now, users may write them down or share them, which is also going to compromise secrecy as well. I told you about putting them on the back of your keyboard when I was opening up. I said it as a joke, but it's something that when I'm out doing vulnerability assessments, I see all the time still being done in the field. Passwords can be guessed. either by a person, or we can use a program, which is going to make it much faster for us to guess your password. It's going to try many different possibilities, do it very, very quickly, and possibly guess your passwords. And passwords may be stored over a network, either in plain text, which means it's written in plain English, or it can be encoded in some way where it can be readily converted back to plain text by a bad guy if he was to get his hands on it. So each of these vulnerabilities I show here on this screen create an opportunity for an attacker to acquire your password values, and consequently what they do is they're going to impersonate you inside your system. So if we are able to manage passwords more securely, or if we use some type of password system in order to do that, even a brute force attack, like I was talking about, somebody can run a computer against it, even that type of thing, or inspection, or with some type of device or some type of software, is going to make your passwords much more secure. So another thing we have to keep in place is that when we're in a large organization or a medium-sized organization, we're going to have a lot of passwords that we have to manage. I believe where I work right now, I probably have 15 to 20 passwords, and that's no joke for the different things that I have to do. Now, each one of those passwords protect different accounts on different systems and different applications that I have to use. But consider this, we're human, right? Users are people, we're not machines. So our ability to try to securely manage all those passwords is going to be very, very difficult. So it's hard for us to remember, they want us to have complicated passwords now, right? Long password. It's hard for us to remember complicated passwords. It's hard for me to remember 15 or 20 different passwords, of course. It's hard to remember passwords that change frequently. We have to change it, say you should change them frequently, but it's hard for us to remember that every 30-day change or every 60-day change. And passwords for systems are used very infrequently for some of the software and some of the applications that I use. So I'll go back to something I haven't visited in a month or two, and I have the hardest time trying to remember what password I use out of that 50 to 20 for that particular application. Now, without those constraints that I just talked about, password security would be a problem anyway, and there would be, without these issues, there wouldn't be a market or a need for password management. But there is, and I'm going to talk about that as we go on. The main thing for you to remember right now is that effective password management is taken to mean that password management is secure, it's user-friendly, and it's going to be supportable within the confines of the technology that we have in our organization and human behavior. Human behavior is always going to be the problem oftentimes that we have in any type of security that we're thinking about. Okay? Now, in order to combat that, and I'm guilty of this myself, what we end up doing is a few things. We end up writing down those passwords, and what that does for us, that reduces the security we have of those systems, because it's dependent on me having it locked in my desk, or having it on top of my desk somewhere in a book that's hidden or whatever, or having it in my wallet. So that's a security problem. I often forget my passwords, and that's another issue. So that's going to require frequent assistance from my IT help desk. I hate to say this, but I'm often calling the IT help desk for them to try to help me reset my password or get me a new password. And some organizations you're able to do that yourself, but you still have to do it. Okay? Or another thing I do is I try to choose a very simple password. And when I have a simple password, that means that it can easily be compromised, and we don't want that as well. Or, as many of you all probably do, I reuse old passwords. I'll use that password again, and if it blocks me, because one of our systems blocks me for using the password maybe 10 times, I may change the last letter or the last number I use. If I use a 1, now I'm going to use a 2 with the same password. Next I'm going to use a 3 with the same password. So all these are problems. And clearly what we need for sound password management practices, we have to, again, consider our human limitations. And we need to try to minimize that bad behavior such as that I just described. So how do we make our passwords stronger? How do we make our passwords harder to guess? Well, again, as I told you before, one of the weaknesses of passwords is that they can be guessed. And while me as a human or you as a human, we might give up after, say, 10 times of trying to guess it, or maybe even 100 times if we're really trying to figure this thing out. Software out there is available that's going to automate that guessing process, and it's going to try millions of times, and maybe in 1 second. So now we have these brute force attacks. And those type of brute force attacks are not made against the login screen or anything like that. It's made against copies of that password database that's out there. So they go out to a password database, and they're going to figure out, they're going to run a dictionary attack or whatever kind of attack that you have with passwords to try to figure out what our password is. So the first line of defense is therefore for us to prevent attackers from getting a copy of our password database in the first place. And I'll talk about that as we go on. But attackers can now go out and they can use tools that's easily downloadable for those brute force attacks. And on the screen you see a couple of them that's popular. I'm a certified ethical hacker, and this is two tools that I have in my toolbox, Loftcrack and John the Ripper. So for us to try to combat this password guessing attack that I'm speaking of, we need to try to pick hard to guess passwords. And one way for us to do that is to ensure that the set of all the possible passwords we use is basically too large for them, the bad guy, to search thoroughly, you know, and hopefully not be able to easily guess our password, which is probably the first thing that an attacker is going to try. So I'm going to talk about some ways that we can do that. Basically, when we're trying to do this, again, we want to use these hard-to-guess passwords. And I have a screen up now that kind of walks you through. I'll try to kind of talk you through how this can happen. So again, we have a number of possible password combinations that we can use. And that's calculated by taking the number of legal characters. So say your folks say you can have 9 characters as a password or 15 characters or whatever it may be. So you take that number of characters in your password and you raise that number to the number of characters in the password. Okay? So what I mean is this. If you look at the document that I have, you can choose your password from the widest possible set of characters that you have. And that's going to be subject to the constraints of that system that you're using where those passwords reside. So if you see the first one, it says character set. I can use 0 to 9 words. And I'm not going to get into exponents and things like that, but that password length, if I choose 5 versus if I choose 10 characters, it's going to be much, much stronger password. So if I just use 5, it's going to be a weaker password. If I use 10, it's going to be a stronger password. Okay? So hopefully you can see that in that illustration. Now, we should have a policy that should be based on hopefully using a longer and stronger password. Okay? That's going to determine how much time that attacker is going to be given to try to crack that password. Now, if you're looking at that screen I have in front of you, the best thing you do is have more character sets. So I have A to Z, I have lowercase, uppercase I can use, 0 to 9, I can have punctuation, and you want to have more punctuation marks that you can use. All those things are going to make it possible for me to have stronger passwords. Oops. Let's see, I need to go back. How do I go back? Okay. So here's some guidance I have for you on making strong passwords. So in practice, it's easy to say these things, but in practice, assuming that we're going to use encrypted passwords, or we don't have encrypted passwords, let's say that, so the attacker is able to see our passwords, here are some guidelines I want to give you. So to ensure that we have the biggest space, the longest password, the biggest search space used, those passwords should at least be 7 characters long. This is what's been found in studies to be a strong enough password, that they need to at least be 7 characters long. They have to contain at least 1 lowercase letter, at least 1 uppercase letter, and at least 1 digit in them. And if it's technically possible, those passwords should contain at least 1 punctuation mark, so long as you have many punctuation marks, at least 10 or more available to you. Now, also people try to use trivial or easy to guess passwords. So we want to guard against trivial passwords as well. And in order to do that, we drop down to my next bullet. They should not contain the user's name or the login ID. Okay, it shouldn't be made. My name is Derek Smith. Shouldn't be D Smith and some other combination. Okay, it shouldn't contain a dictionary word, because as I told you, they'll run a program. The bad guy will run a program against your passwords, and the first thing they're going to do is go to a dictionary, and they're going to look up every word in the dictionary. And again, the computer can go through the dictionary very, very quickly. So it shouldn't contain a dictionary word in any language that user can reasonably be expected to know. And the last thing is that you should use more, as it says, more than 2 paired letters. Okay? I mean, should not use more than 2 paired letters. And it has an example there. A, B, 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 C, D, D. That's not a valid way of doing it. So these are just some guidelines that you want to use to start you off on safe passwords usage. Now, another thing we have to contend with, if you're a global company or you have subsidiaries or whatever in other countries, we have another problem with passwords. So most password composition rules focus on how passwords are composed in what we'll say Latin languages or English languages. Okay, that's English letters, English digits, English punctuation marks, and all that. But unfortunately, as you all probably know, English is the native language of only about 400 million people, and it's spoken by no more than about 1.5 billion people. And that sounds like a lot, but keep in mind it is about 7 billion people in the world. So even if other European languages that use a similar character set are used, a focus on only Latin characters is going to ignore probably 2/3 of the world's population. Okay, so many organizations that's global and include users who speak a variety of languages might have a different issue that they have to contend with. That system or that application whose users reside around the world need to enforce password policy that makes sense for everybody, for all of them. So not just for those who happen to prefer English or happen to speak English. So password management for those multilingual users are going to raise some important considerations that we have to think about. And I'll get to the best practices in just a second. But we have to think about, let's say, 3 things. First, most of those users in most of those countries are going to have keyboards that include mostly Latin characters. And that means that they're going to be able to type passwords composed of English letters, even if they don't write or speak English. So that's number 1. Number 2, not every one of those systems or applications is going to support non-Latin characters and passwords. So when you're composing an enterprise password policy, it's important for you to consider the limitations of those in-scope systems and those applications. Now, if we as managers fail to do that, that can yield a policy that works on some systems but don't work on other systems that's out of the country, let's say. And then we have countries like in China and Japan and Korea where they use another type of symbol. It's called pinyin, P-I-N-Y-N representation, which can cause problems when we're composing our passwords as well. So I have some best practices for you. The first thing you should do is that you should encourage or require those users throughout the country, throughout the world as a matter of fact, to restrict their passwords to Latin characters. You know, both for compatibility for us and also for us to avoid input methods that's going to display the character's user type, because we don't want to try to confuse that among us. The other thing we should do is don't use dictionary lookup to ensure, do use dictionary lookup to ensure that the new words, the new passwords that they make are hard to guess. You know, and we want to include dictionaries of non-English words representing Latin character sets as well. So this is just a couple of best practices you can use if you happen to be a global organization, which some of you I know are. Now, another problem we have is password reuse. And over time, as I already told you in my example, passwords are going to be reused. You know, you're going to get to number 10 and you're going to come up with that password again, you use it 10 times or whatever. So over time, those passwords could be compromised because of that reuse. Okay, users might share them with friends or coworkers to get on the system and make a change, or I might write them down and, you know, they might be exposed on my desk or in that book that I keep them in or whatever it may be. They could be guessed by humans or by those software products that I told you about. The servers might store the passwords and then they could be compromised. And this is a variety of ways that I can come up with. So to limit the usefulness of those passwords that's been compromised, if they are compromised or lost, a best practice for us is to change them regularly. And I mentioned that early on. So a common rule that you might want to have in your organization is to force users to change their passwords when they log in every, let's say, 60 to 90 days or even 30 days if you want to have it every 30 days. Okay? So in general, what I want to do is that I want to make sure that those users be required to change their passwords regularly, as I said. And then those passwords should expire probably no longer than in 90 days. Okay? Now, for those same reasons, I don't want my users to use old passwords. Okay? Those could already be compromised if they've been lost or if my database has been compromised or something like that. So a lot of systems support this by recording some representation of those old passwords, and then they ensure that those users can't change that password back to a previously used value. So that's a good thing to have built into my password management system. Also, you're going to have these smart users out there like I think I am, and I use the same passwords, and I change one of the letters in it. So if to defeat those smart users, some systems also can enforce a password rule that limits the number of password changes that a person can make in a given day. What I mean is this: if a person wants to use the same password and he wants to get back to that password, but the machine keeps him from using it for 5 iterations, he'll just change it 4 times, and then on the 5th time, he'll put it back to the password that he want to use. So by making that process of defeating that password take several days, instead of just me taking 5 minutes to change it 4 times, it's going to discourage those users from trying to reuse those old passwords. Okay. Now, even better approach, though, not available on every system that out there, is to simply maintain an unlimited number of entries that person can use for their password history. So even if it's practical, because what happens is that users can change their passwords as often as they like, and they still can never be able to reuse old passwords. So they won't be able to reuse them at all. Another thing is that we want to keep those passwords secret. So passwords are intended to be reliably to reliably differentiate between an authentic user and an imposter. That's the purpose of it. I want to prove that it really is Derek Smith that's trying to get into that system. So they have to remain secret. They have to remain only known to me. But users frequently behave in ways that lead to password disclosure. Again, writing them down, choosing passwords that's easily guessed, sharing them with my coworkers or my family or my friends, whatever it may be. Those are all issues that we have. So a comprehensive password policy should explicitly forbid people from doing that, forbid your employees from doing that. And it has to also specify some negative consequences for those who violate that policy. If you have to be able to enforce whatever policy you have, no matter whether it's password policy or any type of policy that you have in an organization, with some type of consequences to make it usable. Now, to help users comply with an effective password policy, though, you have to have those user-friendly password management tools and processes should be provided. Maybe some password management system that can automate this for you. Okay, and I'm going to talk about some of the ways we can use it as we go on. I'm going to talk about password synchronization and single sign-on as some of the tools that we can use to make it easier for us to remember those passwords. But with either synchronized passwords, which I'll talk about, or automatically filled in password from single sign-on, those users have fewer passwords to remember, so they're less likely to write those passwords down, and therefore less likely to become a detriment to your organization. Now, what about the people who are always locking themselves out, the intruders who lock themselves out and things like that? A lot of the systems we have can detect repeated attempts to sign into an account with incorrect passwords, and it also looks for a pattern of failed logins. Now, failed logins can come for a lot of different reasons. We can just type it in wrong. We can be a forgotten password that we don't remember. The password being used can just be the wrong password, whatever it may be. It could even be an attacker trying to sign into an account by guessing what our legitimate users' passwords are. So to deter the last of this, an attacker trying to get in, it's reasonable for you and I, or for our system that detects too many invalid attempts during that short period of time, to lock that person out. Now we have the user account locked in order for us to try to prevent further attempts from that person. So we have a lot of systems, many systems out there, as it says here, can detect those repeated attempts signing into that account with incorrect passwords. And for that, I have some best practices that we use in order to try to combine our intruder lockout related policies around this. The first thing is that we want to apply only to regular users. So we want to exempt at least one administrator login account, and that's going to limit the scope of denial of service attacks. If a person can't keep trying and lock up your system, they can't deny service to your system. We can also put a compensating control in place, and a compensating control is something that's an alternative control to whatever we're already using. So we can do something like requiring administrator IDs to have very complex passwords that's changed more frequently than, say, regular IDs. Now, a system administrator or administrator, if someone gets their ID, their password, they're going to be able to get to almost anything within the system. So we might want to have them change their passwords more often. Okay? This way they cannot be guessed because they're too hard, or they won't be locked out because they're changed often. We also apply a high threshold before triggering that intruder alert. For example, 10 failed login attempts in 5 minutes might be the threshold. So somebody's trying to break your passcode and they put in a password 10 times within 5 minutes. Perhaps something is wrong. We need to lock them out. Now, that minimizes lockout caused by users, those having trouble remembering or typing their own passwords, because it does give them some time to try it several times before they're locked out. And the last one is automatically clear lockouts after a short time. For example, say 10 to 15 minutes. So in order for us, I'm going to talk about help desk in just a second, but in order for us to not always have to be administering those password lockouts, if it opens itself up automatically in 5 to 10 minutes, our employees can try it again. Another thing we want to do is encrypt our passwords, especially when we're in storage or in transit. So passwords might be stored on user devices, or they might be stored on a server. But at some point, they have to be transmitted in some form from that device where it was entered by that user to a server that they're trying to log into. So most of our organizations rarely have any influence on how that system or that application is going to store that password. And those are just going to be fundamental characteristics that's built into that system. But those passwords that's transmitted from that client device to that server needs to be protected some kind of way. And normally we protect those by having some type of encryption built into it, like Telnet. Now, Telnet is not good because, of course, it's plain text, but Secure Socket, SSL, SSL, or whatever we have. But as it says here, it's generally not safe to trust the physical security of the communication path between a user's device and that systems the user signs into. So, so we want to have some type of protocol level encryption that we have in place for that. At least those credentials will be protected even if somebody gets their hands on it. Okay? And also it says when an application does not support network layer encryption natively, we want to try to use IPsec, which you see as the next bullet below. IPsec is IP security, and we can use that to protect all our communications, our network level communications. And I'll talk more about that as we go as well. Now I mentioned synchronizing passwords to make it easy for us. And there were a couple ways that we talked about doing that. I talked about single sign-on, and I'll continue with that in just a second. But basically, password synchronization technology that they have out there, that's going to help us maintain our same passwords on 2 or more systems. So it's kind of like single sign-on. But what this does is that it makes it easier for our users to remember their passwords. Therefore, they won't write it down, right? Or they won't have to call an IT help desk to request new passwords every time they forget one. Now, there is some debate out there as to whether password synchronization makes systems more or less secure. But the argument comes down to 2 different things. It comes down to these 2 things. I jumped a little ahead. So what it comes down to is, number 1, synchronization reduces security. So they say that if a single system is very insecure, then compromising that system is going to give an attacker the passwords for every other system which uses synchronized passwords. If they guess one, they have access to all of them. Now, that weakness can be avoided, though, as I have here, by minimizing the use of those type of systems and requiring that users employ unsynchronized password on weak systems. So if it's a weak system, doesn't have good encryption and all that, we might not want to use synchronization. Now, on the other side, though, we can say synchronization improves security. Those users with a lot of different passwords have trouble remembering them, and consequently, they're going to go write them down. So by using synchronized passwords, that's going to reduce security to basically a piece of paper, you know, a note on the user's phone, a note on the back of your keyboard. So in practice, it's very hard for us to get users who have a lot of different passwords to start writing them down. I think you all have dealt with that, or keeping them on some insecure media like a notebook or in their phone. So those 2 arguments basically that I show here can be broken down into this. Basically, when we have synchronized passwords, they're only as secure as the least secure system in scope, so the least secure system that we store them on. If we use unsynchronized passwords, they're only as secure as a piece of paper that we write it down on. So our goal is to try to avoid this at all costs. Now, here's some pros and cons for password synchronization. Most of the modern systems that we have out here now, most of the applications that we use, usually take reasonable precautions to protect their passwords. So synchronized passwords are normally more secure than not having them. But to mitigate the risk that we have on a single system that might store all these passwords being leveraged by an attacker out there, we can do these things. We can exclude insecure systems. Again, if it's an insecure, weak system, we don't want to use it for, if it has no cryptography or anything like that, we don't want to use it for password synchronization. We want to change synchronized password regularly. So we want to assume that either some in-scope systems, some of those systems that we're using are vulnerable, and that passwords might be compromised on them if we use them. So we want to be careful with that. And then we want to force users to choose strong, again, hard-to-guess passwords. So a single hard-to-guess, regularly changing password is going to be more secure than us having multiple passwords. And some of those are going to be easy to guess, and some of those can be may not be changed as regularly as they should be changed. Now we talk about single sign-on. And single sign-on is another technology that replaces us using multiple independent logons with a consolidated authentication process that we can use. So with single sign-on, as it says here, that's any technology that replaces multiple independent logon attempts with a consolidated authentication process. Now, when we talk about single sign-on, there can be a lot of different types that I won't get into now. Enterprise single sign-on, we have some called federated systems and Kerberos and all that. And for time, I won't get into that. But what I will get into is some things that we want to consider. Some things that we want to consider when we're looking at the single sign-on process that we want to put in place. There's some questions that you, as a manager, need to ask yourself. Number one, we want to ask ourselves, is that system secure? Okay, and that system, the answer to that, of course, should be yes. Okay, but it's not that simple. It depends on the strength of that authentication that you use for your system. It looks at the strength of your store credentials and things like that. Another question we ask ourselves is it more or less secure than password synchronization that I talked about? And that's going to be dependent on a lot of things too. The users, what kind of password that we're using in that single sign-on system, a strong password, what kind of authentication factor we use, and make sure that authentication factor is strong, whatever that may be. So we have to look at single sign-on as well. So I told you the help desk is one of the things that we often go to when we forget our passwords. And even with the password, with the help desk, there's some things we have to consider as well. Sometimes users are going to forget their passwords, and they're going to type in the wrong one often enough to trigger an intruder lockout, and they're going to be locked out of that system. So when this happens, they're going to generally call that IT help desk, and they're going to ask for that lockout to be cleared or to be reset. And they're going to get a response from the help desk. It's going to be a certain process. They're going to experience problems trying to log on. They're going to call that help desk and wait for in the service queue. And then that support analyst is going to ask them the name and the problem description, and then they're going to ask for user information, and then support analyst is going to compare that information to some online source to make sure they're really talking to Derek Smith. And if that user is authenticated, they're going to have to do one of three things. They're going to have to reset that forgotten password, they're going to clear that person out, or they're going to have to forward that incident to a higher IT person. Okay, then we're going to try to log on again, and hopefully it'll work and go through that same thing. But with this, there comes some security challenges, okay, that we go through. And those security challenges are things like that ICT support analyst might forget to authenticate you at all and get you back into the system. You know, information about you might be easy for an attacker to guess, making that whole process vulnerable to a social engineering attack. A lot of IT staff might not be able to reset your passwords and clear lockouts in an effective manner, and a whole lot of other things that can happen that's going to compromise your security. So with that, we have to put some mitigating controls in place. And we do that by overcoming these problems in several ways. We can have IT support training to ensure that they have robust authentication of those callers every time they want to have password reset. We can ensure that reliable authentication information is available for every user, including the employees, our contractors, all those folks. We can allow people to reset their own passwords like we do in my organization right now. They can clear their own lockouts after suitable non-password authentication, like 3 things that I know and my birth date and whatever else they ask us. So we have these things. And then we have user authentication. So it's important to ensure that those users who request that password reset, either by calling an IT support help desk or using self-service, are reliably authenticated, and that's the main thing we have to do. So there's some guidelines for that as well, like using one-time password tokens, like that RSA I told you. Now, the main and also with your mobile devices, because today almost every user carries a mobile device. So using the phone as a credential, either by deploying some type of app or sending a PIN via SMS or email, might be a good first step in the login process. So all these things we have to consider for our help desk. Help desk could be a place where we can have security problems, and we end up having problems within our defense in depth strategy that we're trying to use around passwords. Now, the next thing I want to talk about are those mobile devices. Almost everybody, everywhere, every user carries at least one mobile device with them at all times. And those devices are called smartphones. That's what most of us call it anyway. But they're really quite powerful, compact, pocket-sized computers. They can do a lot more than just telephone stuff. And they have a decent quality display, a touch screen, a large variety of sensors on them, internet access, you name it. But these devices also can be a problem when we're looking at how to keep our systems safe, keep our organization safe, keep our corporate information safe. And I want to give you a couple of those challenges that we have. So users that we have for these mobile devices, they expect to be able to interact with a variety of different computing services, including that corporate password management system that we put in place. So from those handheld computers, they can do a lot of different activities. They're usually going to interact with their corporate email or calendars or any other applications that we have available from those devices. So the lead challenges are these. Number one, connectivity. So that password management system that you choose to put in place is usually going to be deployed on premise somewhere, and it's going to be attached to the private corporate network, and it's going to be firewalled off the public internet. But that's a problem for smartphones, because those smartphones are attached to the public internet, and they usually have no access to services inside our corporate network. So when we enable those devices to reach service inside our corporate network perimeter, that's going to require either inbound connections across our firewalls or us exchanging messages with our internet attack proxy system that we might have in place. So you see there's a problem there. We gave that uncleared person access to our cleared systems. And the second thing is cache passwords. So text input into smartphones, we all know that's a pain in the first place. But what it does is that most phone-based apps try to minimize us using this. Okay, for example, if we cache password to corporate services or something like that. So users don't have to re-enter their password every time they read their corporate email or check their corporate calendar or their phone. But whenever a user's password is changed on the internet, those cached passwords are usually invalidated. And the phone basically could trigger a lockout by offering that cached password too often. So ideally, in our organization, we want to deploy a password management system that's going to make it available for users via their smartphones. So rather than opening an inbound connection to our system or across our corporate firewall, it's going to be safer for us to broker communication between our phone and an on-premise password management system through the cloud or through some type of cloud process. Then we have our bring your own device opportunities. So where a user needs to reset a password or clear a lockout but cannot launch a browser on their PC, they could possibly use some type of other bring your own device type of device. So there's a growing demand for those users to leverage multi-factor authentication for a variety of different use cases, including authenticating into our self-service password reset system that we might have. So that smartphone becomes a device where most users already have one, right? So the app on that phone can be used as a credential. That's something that you have, I talked about, in that logon process. All right. So real quick, this is just a different type of privileged accounts that we're protecting with our passwords. Administrative accounts, application accounts, and our personal computer accounts, our desktops, our laptops that we carry. And some common practices we have that we have to think about with this is how we're going to store it, how we're going to reset those passwords, and who knows our password, the IT staff, network operations, and all that. And some of those problems you see is that oftentimes they're widely known and there's no accountability. We have a lot of unchanged passwords if we're not forcing changes. We have a lot of lost passwords, same passwords used across multiple systems, very simple passwords that's easy to guess, passwords that's not available when we need them. They also have some key business drivers that tells us that we have to protect people's information and therefore protect passwords like Sarbanes-Oxley, PCI, all these type of things. So, and then we have our privileged account business and technical requirement considerations. You know, we need to have an exceptionally secure solution. We have to have supreme performance from that solution. We have to have flexible distributed architecture, single standard solutions, intuitive and robust interfaces. So with that being said, what I want to do is I want to pass this on now to my partner, Martin, and he's going to discuss how his password management system might be able to help in the situations, the kind of situations that I just spoke about. Martin, I give it to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Great presentation. So obviously, I mean, you know, as you probably heard, I mean, there is so much to consider when it comes to password management. And, you know, really when it comes to passwords, I mean, you're as strong as your weakest link. You know, I mean, if the passwords are used everywhere, people will, you know, compromise systems. They will then leverage bad PAM and bad password management to then traverse away across the organization. So one of the things that we've done, you know, if we start actually looking at the overall portfolio of Beyond Trust, in the PAM side, I mean, we got things like AD bridges, you know, so we allow you to be able to remove all of those carbon-based lifeform accounts in the first place and just stick to, you know, accounts like root, SQL Server, Oracle, administrator. I mean, anything that's, you know, really sort of not belonging to a human being. You know, obviously in the case of Unix, Linux, that's, you know, predominantly going to be root. We have delegation systems to control what happens when you get there on Unix, Linux, Mac, Windows Desktop, Windows Server. You know, specifically to this particular conversation, you know, password management, but also SSH keys. You know, passwords are really just one element. Anything that can be leveraged, any attack surface, is something that needs to be locked down, and certainly SSH keys falls under that umbrella. So once you've managed all your credentials and your passwords, you then need to then control how people get onto them. And this is where I want to show you during this little segment, is that really the best password management system is one where you never ever have to give the passwords out. You know, we allow you to be able to log in to your endpoint without ever revealing their credentials. So just taking a look at the what we have in you know, from a password safe perspective, as you'd expect, the meat and potatoes is password management. People logging on in order to be able to access accounts. We can also manage Windows service accounts, restart if need be, and a full A2A interface to allow you to be able to remove all of your passwords from applications and scripts. As I mentioned, SSH key management falls into this umbrella because this is another area where people can use, you know, to be able to log on, especially, you know, predominantly using privilege. And then, you know, all of that tied up, all of these aforementioned credentials can be used to automatically log you onto a session. And our session recording, which is actually incidentally built into the product, you don't need to purchase it separately. It's there, you know, whether you like it or not. You know, allows you to be able to automatically be logged on. We can record everything. We do real-time alerting. The latest release, we can even do command blocking on SSH, and you know, the other nice thing that I like is also real-time monitoring. So you can look over people's shoulder if need be, see what they're doing, and if they're doing something nefarious, you can block the session or you can terminate it. So how it works is, you know, users going to log on to the password safe system, and let's say they need to access an item in this enclave or security zone. They're going to log on, say, yep, okay, I need access to the system, and what's going to happen is password safe is going to talk to the proxy and generate a unique session key. So it's a one-time key. It's valid for roughly about 3 minutes. It'll send down to your desktop. Now, bear in mind, there's no code required on the desktop, no code required on the server. This is purely network-based. So what happens is, let's say, for example, in the case of RDP, you know, we're going to generate an RDP file locally. That will automatically be launched by MSTSC, and that will then log you onto the proxy. So, you know, the session key is used as a username to log you onto the proxy, and the proxy then looks at the session key and says, okay, yeah, here's the host, here's the you know, the username and the password, and it opens that inside connection. Now, at no time does the host name, the username, and the password ever actually get exposed on the client. And that's the really cool thing about it. So if somebody's poking around with Mimikatz, looking in your memory space, saying, okay, well, what can I actually essentially get rid of, then this allows you to be able to really sort of lock things down, you know, because all you're going to have is just an expired session key. So it's just a great way of doing it. Now, the other thing as well, which we recently introduced, is enhanced session auditing, because, you know, if you think of a standard Windows session, you're just poking around, clicking on pictures. You're not necessarily typing. And so, whereas with SSH, you've got standard in, standard out, you can search for, things that people might have run or things that they might have seen on the screen. With Windows, it's always been traditionally more difficult. So what we now have is the ability to audit every single action that happens within that user interface. So this is actually the replay interface of a recorded session. So there's a video recording that you can play. You can play, obviously to sort of change the speed. Got the ability to cycle through to next action. You can click on the bar as well to be able to move yourselves backwards and forwards in the session, a little bit like you can on YouTube if you like. But then what you've also got is an indexed set of all of the keystrokes and all of the elements that happen. So a person, clicked on this window, this menu opened up. So this allows you to be able to search. So let's say, for example, you want to know who ran this application. You can search all your sessions. That will bring up all the sessions where that application was opened. You can then search within that particular session, find the application, you click on it, it takes you straight to that index. We've even got areas where you can add comments, we got like a review sign off, and if need be, you can even take snapshots of what you're seeing to actually, to email out to people. So, the whole element of this is around sort of being able to manage that. And like I say, this is included in the product. This is free of charge. The other thing that's important as well is what we call adaptive workflow control. So this is taking the context of, not just who you are, and what you're trying to access, but also looking at the day, the date, the time of day, and where you are. I mean, it's looking at your source IP address. Are you logging in from a corporate network with strong DLP restrictions? Well, you know what? Maybe we're actually going to limit access to these accounts. Logging in from a VPN, middle of the night, we're going to give you access to these firewall accounts. So it allows you to be able to give some really good, sort of security decisions based upon all of those real-time elements of what you're trying to do. Now, as well as also being able to log you into like an RDP session, SSH session, we can also launch applications. So, for example, ESX, we can manage your vSphere credentials. We could then actually, launch vSphere automatically as a remote app, automatically get signed in. We pass the credentials through. Everything gets recorded. Everything that you do, that's indexed, that's replayable. Same thing for Unix, Linux. We can actually, allow you to be able to, launch applications. We can pass credentials to those applications. When it comes to the reporting and analytics, we can actually start letting you, analyze not only, what your users are doing in terms of activity, but, how your security policies are set up in your organization. What does it look like? We can scan your organization and tell you where all your accounts are that haven't been changed for a certain period of time, or accounts that have maybe never been logged onto. You can look for, where all your password changes happening, where are all your service accounts, even drill down and actually do advanced threat analytics. So, as I said, there's a lot of stuff, you can do with this. Just to give you an example of how this looks, if I'm a user, I want to log into a Windows session, I simply select the system, and what you'll see here is this has gone out, generated the session key. This is now logging me directly onto that box. So, ultimately, I can go in, I can see whatever I need to do, and I can work. Now, if I'm an administrator, what I can do is I can actually look at all the active sessions. So just going to refresh that here. It takes a while for it to pop up. And what I can do is I can actually look over that person's shoulder. Actually, I don't wonder if my session's expired. Let me just try that again. Maybe it's not. It's a slow system. But you know what? What I can do is actually show you what the replay looks like, as we looked at just now. Whether it's actually, domain controller I'm trying to log on to, whether it's a remote app that I'm running, I can actually go in, I can actually then start playing back everything that was recorded within that session. So, as I say, it's that ability to be able to not only view what they're doing, lock what they're doing, but I can also, have the ability to be able to play it back in real time. I seem to actually be losing my voice in a moment. So, at this point, with about 3 minutes to spare, what I'm going to do is just pass it over to back to Sarah, and we'll do the poll.
Perfect.
Sarah, over to you.
Yep. Let me go ahead and launch that poll. just based on what you saw. I know it was really quick, you guys, but kind of getting you a little sneak peek into Password Safe. But would you like to be contacted for a deeper conversation and a one-on-one demo specifically around Password Safe? So if you select yes, somebody will be in contact with you and can get a demo set up. Martin, I know you were losing your voice, but I had a question come in while you were doing your part, so I'm just going to get into that question. How does PSM work for a user who needs to log on to multiple, for example, 10 servers at a time, and currently does it using an RDP SSH manager that logs them into multiple systems with a single click?
So one of the things that we have, so we do integrate with third-party remote desktop manager systems. So we have the ability to be able to, I mean, one in particular is actually one from Devolution's Remote Desktop Manager. It allows you to be able to identify, a set of systems, that you need access to. I mean, it'll, through, the permissions, you'll actually get a list of all your systems actually within there. So without having to go into the Password Safe UI, you can organize them into folders and actually then pull them up within a tabbed interface. So you don't necessarily have to go through our system. From a checkout perspective, we actually do have a bulk checkout capability. So, for example, if you've got a domain account and you want to use, like 100 systems, you can check out that domain account and then instantly be able to open up RDP sessions to each one of those. Essentially, I mean, you're just going to select a multi-system checkout option when you check out the account. That allows you to be able to use it on what we call all linked systems. So a couple of ways around that. So again, I don't know whether that answers the question, but hopefully that helps.
Okay, I'm going to close down this poll, and we have time for one more question for you, Derek. So what are your recommendations or your tips on password management and password managers?
Hi, so thank you very much. So for that, I would say that the number one thing you want to do is have a good password management system, as we were just talking about, but you want to pay for a good one that has encryption and has at least two-factor authentication, maybe multi-factor authentication. And even, I talked a lot about mobile devices, so even one that has a portable version for your mobile devices so you can see it when you're on the go. So my thing is, don't skimp and go with one of the freebies that doesn't include some of the very important features that I think you should have. It's going to cost you more in the long run if you don't invest in the right type of password management system now. So that's my answer for that.
All right, guys, we have approached the top of the hour. I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. A reminder, I've received a lot of questions about the recording. I think people are really interested in your slides, Derek. So just so everybody knows, you will be receiving an email with a link to the recording and the slides shown here today within 2 business days from now. And it will come from communications@beyondtrust.com. That's our email alias. And it will be sent to the email with which you registered for this webinar. So be on the lookout for that. And a big thanks to our speakers today, Derek and Martin. Always a pleasure. Thank you guys for being here. And a huge thanks to everybody who attended live today. We do appreciate your time and you guys being here and participating in these webinars. And you guys are the ones that make them successful. So thank you so much for being here. Have a wonderful rest of your day and week. Take care, everybody. Goodbye.